Welcome to FO Talks. With me is Casey Given, the Executive Director of Young Voices. He is an interesting chap who has started organizations and indeed is now running a platform that gives voice to young intellectuals who are finding their voice. Casey, welcome and thank you for your time.
Thanks. It's so great to be here.
Brilliant. So, Casey, let's talk about civil liberties and free speech. From your background, it seems you've always cared about these issues. What do you really mean by civil liberties and free speech?
Oh, good question. I think I would just go with the definition of, at least my priors. I am what would be called a classical liberal or libertarian. So I'm really interested in free speech and individual or civil liberties, really more in the sense of the individual liberty standpoint. So,
Are you a John Stuart Mill sort of liberal?
Yes, exactly. So I would say that, but of course, as an American, I'm very interested in the Bill of Rights. I think is really what the types of liberties that I seek to preserve and defend, especially through my organization as a vehicle.
I see. And so, Bill of Rights. So, give us a little more meat. Then, what do you see as the role of the state? Should the role of the state be minimal? Should the role of the state be limited to foreign policy and defense, and perhaps running the Federal Reserve, or maybe not? Or should it extend to other areas such as regulating the environment or providing welfare to those who have been left behind?
Yes, all good questions. I used to, we were just talking about before the stream about my undergrad days at UC Berkeley. And I used to love getting into these kind of size of the state arguments.
Where I taught, by the way, you didn't take my class.
and we were both knocking it. I wish I had taken your class. But I used to get into arguments all the time with my fellow students about minarchy versus anarchy.
Yeah.
And to some degree, as I get older, I'm less interested in that. I like to describe myself as a directional libertarian in a sense that I think the size of the state should be directionally smaller. But that's not.
You're not an absolutist anymore. You don't
Right.
say, let's just get rid of, let's say in the UK context, you're not someone who'll say, let's get rid of the National Health Service.
Exactly. Yes. That's a great example. Or in the American context, of course, things like Social Security, or you specifically mentioned welfare. I think that to overnight abolition is a ridiculous concept, but I think that there's plenty of halfway measures to reform these programs that desperately need it.
Yeah. So I read your column on The Hill, and you had predicted that the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, would find it hard going in Washington. And the budget seems to have proved your point. And indeed, Elon Musk has talked about the big and beautiful bill and said it can either be big or beautiful. It can't be both. So, so are you dissatisfied with the budget, which is going to increase trillions of dollars of government debt and boost the deficit?
Yes, absolutely. I'm dissatisfied with it. I was a cautious optimist for Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, and now that he's leaving, I still think it was a good faith effort. But the thing is, in many ways, he was getting all of the blame for the dysfunction, when the sense that I think there should be more blame exactly on Congress, which is an actual branch of government that has basically absolved itself of any responsibility and has given into the big government wasteful spending as seen in the budget. So I think it's very disappointing. I think that conservatives in Congress aren't actually being conservative. That's why I still firmly identify as a libertarian rather than conservative or Republican, is that I think that we need to actually activate the branches and have smart governance.
Hmm. So let's talk about what would you like to see? Would you like to see a cutting down of regulation for small business? Would you like to see a cutting down of, say, defense spending or Medicare or Medicaid or Social Security? Would you like to see an increase in taxes to balance the budget a little bit? What is it that you would like to see? And since you've said you're a libertarian, where do you stand on tariffs?
Yes. So I think, to frame it in terms of, well, first to return to DOGE, I think that a lot of the cuts that they made were directionally sensible. There's just so much waste when it comes to kind of feeding off of the trough of pork barrel spending when it comes to NGOs where their mission is not exactly clear. Of course, that is a drop in the bucket, and I absolutely understand the points that critics have of DOGE of that, is that the real kind of wasteful spending or the real kind of, at least just statistically, the biggest areas of the federal budget are, of course, entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, and defense spending on the discretionary side. So to really tackle those, I would say that defense spending, obviously, there needs to be a lot more auditing of the Department of Defense. I mean, it seems like regularly that they lose billions of dollars that they can't account for, which is just completely unacceptable. And in terms of Medicare, Social Security is perhaps well, Social Security, I think that we need to raise the retirement age for the future. It was not expected when it was created by FDR. 65 was well above the average lifespan. Now people are fortunately living so much longer lives, so I think it's fair to raise the age of payout. And Medicare, I think that it's really disappointing. I think that Elon and kind of brief tweeted about a lot of fraud. I suspect that that's probably the biggest program where there's a lot of or excuse me, not Medicare, Medicaid. There's a lot of wasteful spending of people claiming to be disabled, et cetera, who actually aren't. So I think there's ways to meaningfully save the budget on certain ways. But again, as a directional libertarian, I think it's not take the baby out with the bathwater. I think that there needs to be halfway measures and more rational reforms slowly.
I mean, you're making the case for a responsible right, really. What you're
Yes.
doing is that let us have sensible policies. And so, talking about sensible policies, let me take you back to tariffs. Most people who are libertarians, indeed, go back to the original classical liberals. They stood for free trade. The Economist magazine began on the principle of free trade. And where do you stand on that? Because we are living in a very different era now with industrial policy under Joe Biden, and before that, tariffs as an instrument of trade policy under Donald Trump 1 and Donald Trump 2.0.
Yes, this is the area where I would be the most critical of Donald Trump. I think that his tariff policy has been an absolute disaster. I think that it's, really kind of, if anything so far, punishing our closest friends in terms of Canada, EU, et cetera. And so I think, and even if you believe in tariffs, this is something I often tell to my friends who are big Trump supporters, is that even if you believe tariffs, I think the way that he's going about it is completely irrational, where he changes his mind every 24 hours. It's like, if you're going to set a policy, just by pure regime stability, is that markets will adjust if you just put the tax in place. So I think that tariffs are destructive. I think the whole framing of a tariff deficit is completely twisted, and not really what a state should try to pursue. Because, of course, Trade makes trade is a mutual benefit. It's, it goes back to economics 101, which I won't dare even have to bring up in front of an economics professor, political economy professor. But I think that it's completely silly and destructive what the admin is doing. So I hope they'll knock it off.
I see. So you have been libertarian, and you went to Berkeley, where you and
Yes.
I both spent time. You as a student, I as faculty, and I found Berkeley very ideological, very to the left. What was it like um, being a young libertarian in Berkeley, and of course, even in George Washington University?
Yes. Well, I should say also, I should probably reveal my age that I'm 35. So I graduated in 2012, which I feel that, maybe in the scope of my life is not that far away or doesn't feel like it. But it really is, I think, a separate, era of history, at least in the US. Not just, of course, this was under the Obama years, but also in terms of kind of campus attitudes towards free speech. Greg Lukianoff and the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education really say that 2014 is when there was kind of a new regime when it came to free speech and the growth of the administrative state and universities, et cetera, that kind of kicked off the current wokeness age backed by law. So I would say that I actually really enjoyed my time at UC Berkeley. It was there was certainly predominantly left when it comes to the average student body, but I would say even at that time, the most of the people I encountered were very cordial. We had fun. I ran the college libertarian group, so we had debates with the college Republicans, with the Democrats, et cetera. And most students, I would say, since it's a top tier school, as you know, maybe not in the humanities, but at least in and STEM, I would say
Oh,
that
it's one of the best in the world. I mean, for
yeah.
computer science, for physics, for so many disciplines, it is a school with Nobel Prize winners, cutting edge research, and really clever young people.
Yeah, and so I would say that most students were kind of heads down, wanted to do the homework, and there was just kind of a small faction of ideological, very lefty students that created trouble, which is often the case in college campuses.
Got it. Now, the reason I asked you was whether your experience led you to uh, run Young Voices, the organization you are supporting. You're supporting young people of the right who are commenting on politics, policy, civil liberties, um, and um, and I was wondering if your student experiences were formative or not in working on this.
Oh, absolutely. That is really where I solidified in my mind that I have a knack for leadership. I started the libertarian student group my sophomore year, and I also my senior year became known on campus enough that I became the political columnist for the student newspaper, the Daily Californian, which really, I think, put me on my current trajectory, ultimately leading to my position as CEO of Young Voices. So in many ways, I'm living the fantasy that I had in on my undergrad days of pursuing political commentary and running an organization like that full time.
So let me ask you a question. How do you navigate the needle, or how do you thread the needle between the liberal establishment and the populist right? Because you clearly don't fall into either camp. You very much, as you've said, you want to be the responsible right. You are a libertarian, but you're directionally. So you're not, let's slash and burn, let's throw the baby out with the bathwater. So you're in a tricky situation, Casey.
Yes, that is a very good question, and that I've thought about a lot. I feel like, um, in many ways, libertarians, at least of my ilk, I like the responsible right moniker, or classical liberals is probably what many people of my peers call ourselves. Really do kind of try to. It's a tightrope of kind of, not trying to throw out the liberal establishment as you meant, but also not trying to be too radical, especially when it comes to populism or illiberalism, or national, kind of the national conservative economics, as they like to call themselves. I
The Steve Bannon approach that you need tariffs, you need economic nationalism, you need to bring jobs back for the working class, and a combination of immigration controls and tariffs will resuscitate the American working class.
Yes. So here's how I thread the needle. I want to give both sides kind of their due. I think that the Steve Bannon populist right has hit on something that I think is correct, in the sense that there has been widespread failure of institutions going back for decades now. Failure to respond to security challenges. I mean, even going back to 9/11, failed wars, the COVID pandemic, the 2008 financial crisis. There's just we are living in an era, even down to everyday living, of like crumbling infrastructure, where government institutions are failing, and people are feeling like they're getting the short end of the stick. And I think that anger is justified in many ways. However, I think that kind of the way that it is manifested, especially with MAGA, of just like we need to tear everything down, or we need to punish our enemies, is that is ultimately a philosophy of destruction rather than a philosophy of building. And I think it's very dangerous, again, to throw the baby out with the bathwater of trying to just completely destroy things, or really express your anger rather than trying to actually reform. So, I do respect people on the populist right who are trying to do a little more of the building. And I respect people. It seems like on the left too. Like, I'm very encouraged by trends on the left, like the abundance agenda, who are really looking forward, really looking for more proactive, good institution buildings that involves markets. And I hope to see more of that on both sides. That solution oriented, not just culture wars, destructive anger kind of expressive in that way.
All right, fair enough. Let me ask you a more pointed question. Who funds Young Voices, and how do you ensure editorial independence? We
Yeah,
are a non-profit too, and we've had to fight really hard, and ours is a crowdsourced approach. So that's why I asked this question, having gone through this myself.
absolutely. That's a question I get often. Young Voices, we are completely privately funded, 100% from individuals, foundations, and corporations. These are a mix of anywhere who gives us, people who give anywhere from $1 to $100,000 or so. We have over 50 donors who give us above $5,000, I believe, or so. So it's a good mixture of people that I think just having a diverse portfolio of supporters is a great way to keep ourselves independent, and not be anyone's toady, if you will. But beyond that, beyond the who question, the we also have lots of practices in place. We have a code of ethics that's on our website that specifically kind of outlines our approach to editorial independence, and the fact that no donor is ever can influence or edit our drafts. And more so than that, actually, we've restricted the editorial independence of our writers as well, is that we allow our writers to more or less write whatever they like, so long as it is broadly within classical liberal principles. So we really take independence and ethics quite seriously.
I see. Now, tell me what exactly um, do you do in Young Voices, and how do you do it? We have an idea, but I'm very curious. Um, Obviously, you have a number of people from the libertarian school or the classical liberal philosophy whom you're schooling. How do you find them? What exactly do you do with them? And what is the vision?
Yes, so we find our writers. Well, first of all, we're a program that's in high demand in the sense that we what we do is we offer editorial services and media training and placement services at absolutely no cost. So that means we edit and pitch op-eds, we schedule radio and TV hits, we get people onto broadcast media, arrange in-person speaking events, etc., at no cost to the participant. So just through that, I think the appeal of that offer, we get over 200 applications every year for our programs, of which we accept about a half or just under half.
Mhm.
In terms of where we find our folks, we are trying to get better about actively recruiting because I think we're more interested at this point in quality of participants rather than quantity of applicants. And we find them from undergraduate groups that are classical liberal, libertarian, conservative groups, sourcing them, as well as probably the biggest area we've had success with is think tanks, both in DC where we're headquartered, but also across the country and in Europe through networks like the Atlas Network or State Policy Network. Is we really try to find people who are getting their first roles, looking to build a career in the world of ideas, and grow with us in that way.
So let's talk about Europe. Since you've mentioned Europe, you're just back from Europe. We have a strong presence in Europe. In fact, part of our editing team is in Europe. And right from the outset, which countries are you focused on, and where are you finding classical liberals of great promise in Europe?
Yeah, so we are in about 20 countries across the continent.
Hmm.
Of course, when I say that, I mean we're working with individual writers in the countries. So it's not
Hmm.
super institutional in the sense, but rather individual relationships.
Hmm.
Um, we have one employee based in the UK who does all of our editing and pitching across the continent. But really, from there, it's more, we're not trying to put dots on a map, but rather work with people in the think tank and journalism world that we think are aligned with our values and are very excited to develop their careers in media. So yeah, that's been our
So,
approach.
so no relationships with political parties yet in Europe. Not a single political party.
No, as a 501(c)(3), even in
Hmm.
the United States, we don't have any formal relationships with the Republican Party or a Libertarian Party or anything. We work purely with individuals.
Purely with individuals. I
Hmm.
see. The reason I asked is because in Europe, classical liberalism often means something different to what Americans mean, and often the people you'd call liberals in Germany, for instance, are extremely free market, and liberals in the US are quite interventionist. Hence the question, and also the change in the zeitgeist in Europe now is leading to a curious combination of populism, both on the left and the right. And classical liberalism is finding it hard um, to stay afloat.
Yes, it absolutely is. And I think that's something that I hope to try to change.
Excellent.
And I think it does come, to answer a question that you didn't ask, but I do think about this a lot,
Mhm.
is that I do think it comes to that metaphor you used of stringing the needle of that. You really have both sides. One the left that has kind of been embraced by, or the establishment kind of neoliberal order, versus the right, which is increasingly more populist and aiming to destruct that order. And so I think, I think that the middle ground is where classical liberals can really lean into and say that institutions are important,
Mhm.
elites are important, but they need to be held accountable. That's really where I see at least my version of classical liberalism can do. But I know that's kind of a message that is not really satisfying to one side completely. So
So let me ask you, since you have an employee in the UK, and I'm sure you go to the UK, and I, of course, um, lived and studied in the UK for a while. In fact, I've written a book chapter on Brexit, amongst other things, and I follow Britain very closely. Uh, where do you see classical liberalism in the political landscape of Britain today?
yes, I would
And
say
this is
that,
a country that gave birth to the idea. It's the
yeah,
land of John Stuart Mill, who, by the way, worked for the East India Company.
wow,
And although he was very liberal, he did not advocate freedom for Indians because he felt they were not in the maturity of their faculties.
wow, yeah.
Look, no turkey ever votes for Christmas, I suppose. He didn't want to lose his paymaster.
Exactly. He actually did the same for Catholics too, which I'm a Roman Catholic, so I would not in his world either have been granted the
So
full,
both of us wouldn't have had
yeah,
the vote. Women
exactly.
would have the vote, though, if they were Anglican and Protestant. So he was progressive in many ways, ahead of
Exactly.
his time, but not too progressive.
Yeah. To answer your question, I do go to the UK at least once a year.
Yeah.
Um, it seems like at least politically in the parties, it's very difficult. I mean, I would say that of course historically the Conservatives, the Tories have been the party that embraced more classical liberal ideas.
Mhm.
With the current wipeout they had recently, it seems like their stock is really on the decline.
Yeah,
I
Rishi
actually,
Sunak, he did the same degree as me. He did philosophy, politics, and
oh wow,
economics as well. And he was, I think, 2 or 3 years my senior. And shall we say, he, uh, he was very efficient, very clever, very hardworking, very good at time management. But he has the charisma of a dead mouse. Uh,
yeah, it's
and the convictions of a middle manager in Goldman Sachs.
yes, absolutely,
That does not fly in electoral politics.
yeah. And I was in London in February for the ARC conference, the Alliance of Responsible Citizenship. So I heard there was a lunch with I always mispronounce her name. Is it Kenley or
Kemi Badenoch.
Kemi? Yes. So I heard from her, gave a speech, and it certainly seems like there's more energy. She seems to at least be an improvement on Rishi, but it seems like all the Brits in the room afterwards were really not very happy with her.
Well,
So yeah,
she is very weak right now and is unlikely to stay in the job for long. So you don't see very many people in
yeah.
that space. What about the US? What's your great shining light for the US?
Yes, for the U.S., I would say that there's really not a great classical liberal, too many classical libertarian voices in government either. I think, of course, the closest we have is like Rand Paul or a Thomas Massey or whatnot.
Mm.
So I think so I think it's a little bleak right now politically, but I think the great thing about the US, the hope is that we have so many nonprofits like Young Voices, but so many others, think tanks like the Cato Institute, the Reason Magazine, Mercatus Center, etc. There's hundreds and hundreds of them. The Atlas Network. That I think we have a strong civil society, NGOs in the U.S. that hopefully, if we're doing our job well, the stock of libertarianism, classical liberalism will be on the rise. Just to return to the UK really quickly, I think that that's the problem, is that there's not as strong of a nonprofit NGO sphere for classical liberals there. Although I do think the one hope I would see is exactly that conference I just mentioned, ARC, the Alliance of Responsible Citizenship, which was explicitly classical liberal and had over 4,000 attendees. It was at the Expo Center in East London. So I think that there is hope. That would be hopefully the long-term hope in the UK, is building more of that civil society nonprofit sphere that will hopefully eventually manifest itself in politics. And I would say in the US, hopefully, I think the libertarian classical liberal movement is perhaps a few decades ahead in terms of at least the strength and the quantity. But I absolutely understand the frustration, especially donors might have, that we need to start racking up wins, especially when it comes to the political sphere.
Excellent. Casey, thank you very much for your time. We'll have you back, and we will continue to publish Young Voices that you send our way. Good luck. You have your job cut out. It is certainly living up to the Chinese proverbs or Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. So you have your work cut out in interesting times.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this chat.
Thank you.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.